We,
3 others are gone. I took their names.
Oh, okay. So as long as we have our roll call, we'll call the meeting to order. Proceed.
All right, thank you. Thank you. I jumped right in there.
It's all good.
All right. So a review of where we have been. Last month, we had Steve Deller and Dave Marcoulier visit us. And remember, they talked about amenities and the importance of amenities in affordable housing development. And we talked about some of the other issues that Steve brought with some of the larger economic picture in communities surrounding housing. And the 2 primary takeaways when I asked them, Dave said to remember that amenities are crucial or vital to community development. Steve, when I asked Steve, like, what's the one thing we want people to remember from your presentation, access to amenities are a matter of equity, and that we should keep that in mind and not look at it as something that we only access if we have the money to be able to afford a house with access to sidewalks or libraries or whatnot. So they said collectively that if we consider, and these are things consistent with what our discussion was last month, walkability, access to parks, schools, libraries, food and transportation when planning for more affordable housing. So those are things to keep in mind, and like I said, consistent with everything that we discussed over the last couple of months. So that's where we have been. Where we are, what we talked about in addition to that last month, remember we reviewed some demographic information, kind of a lighter version of what Dan will talk about next month. But we were looking primarily at incomes and revolving around the median income discussion. 50% of the people make above, 50% of the people below. And using Kurt Paulson, professor from Urban and Regional Planning in Madison, his concept of the middle, the missing middle income in a lot of communities, that's 80% of median household income to 120%. And so when we looked at these distributions for the different compositions of households, we could see that there is a fairly clear kind of missing segments in here. Our missing middle income, if we look at Dane County's median income, 80% of Dane County's median income to 120% of Dane County's median income is between $52,000 and $78,000 a year. That's across all households. When we look at non-family households, and remember that definition from the census were single folks, 2 roommates living together, not married household, people in a household that are either single or living with people that they're not related to in some way. And that income bracket was between $34,000 and $51,000, and below this, we would say there's another segment that is also a segment that we're concerned about, $0 to $33,000. So sound familiar? It refreshed everyone's memory? All right, I'd like to, at the beginning of meetings when we've gone over some technical information, just kind of review what we've been doing. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to you, Sharon. And we're going to talk about our values and our working agreement.
Okay. So the very first time this group met in this room was 2 months ago. And you'll remember that we had small group conversations and we asked the question, how do we want to work together? What are the values that drive the work of the task force? And in front of you, what I handed out is the consolidated list of all of those comments that different groups made. Now, the plan of action was that Tiffany and somebody else were going to get together and from that drive a value statement and working agreements. But unfortunately, and Tiffany's name tag isn't there, unfortunately Tiffany had a family issue of a child being ill and said she couldn't come tonight. So what I did was made the next step. And, whoops, let me see if I can, Kirsten, I might need you to find that document again. Yeah, it popped in. Right, okay, thank you. What I did was looked at the list that we had, and I thought, what am I seeing consistently? What am I seeing was named in 2-3 groups? And can we turn that into a value statement? So what I'm going to do is give you a proposed draft version of a value statement, of a list of values that drive this, and also working agreements. We're going to read through this, and it may be hard to read, so you can have that out. Here's a printed copy, but I wanted to let you know before I handed out the printed copy, this is just a proposal, it's a draft, and we have the ability right now to modify it, to edit it by group. So we'll take a few minutes and read through it, and then open it up for suggestions of how to change that. So starting with the proposed values, just a definition of why do you have values? One more here.
We need more here.
We had 2 sets.
Yeah. Are they in sets?
Oh, are they?
No, they're not sets.
Oh, yeah.
Two pages.
Have some back.
Oh, it is
So-
2 pages. Oh, sorry.
That's clean.
All right, it was supposed to be front and back.
All right, tell me what you need and I will make sure you get it.
Let me see what you
Okay,
Let me
good.
hold it up.
Three?
All
You
right.
should have
You
one
have
that
two
says
and two.
proposed values,
Three.
one that says proposed working agreements. Thanks.
Thank you.
My bad. I failed handing out.
Okay, I'm gonna hold out until you're done handing out. Thanks, Butthole.
We're good? We're good? All right. You need your copy, Sharon.
I want to make sure everyone's got it. There you go, everybody got it. I'll hold it. Okay. So you've all got it in front, but what you need to realize is that that's a draft, okay? So now we'll go and look at it together. There you go. Okay, so just at the top is why do you have core values with an organization or a group working together? It's to demonstrate the ideals that the group strives to achieve. Values express how a group wants to be known. When written down, these communicate to members and others how the group perceives itself and how it strives to operate. So within those values, I saw respect at least 3 times, and also words that were similar to respect. So let me have Sam, can you read out loud respect, the definition I used?
You recognize and admire the value that each individual brings to the work of the group and treat each other and members of the community in such a way as to honor their value and contribution.
So these were mine, right? The definitions, just pulled from some of the words that came out. I think we'll read through all of them and then open it up for what do you want changed. Are you willing to read the next one, Mila?
Open-mindedness, we are receptive to new ideas and believe that everyone is free to express their views. We recognize the value of others' knowledge.
Can you read the third one?
I have a very soft.
Okay, we'll skip you. And we'll come back to
Inclusion.
your ideas. Yeah.
Inclusion. All people have the right to be respected and appreciated as valuable members of the community. As representatives of our community, we advocate for others who are not on the task force. We will seek ways to assure that all voices are heard throughout the process.
Thanks. And since we're just going around, how about Tom?
Sure. Integrity. Value honesty, openness, fairness, and reliability. We are committed to high standards in doing the work of the committee.
And collaboration, we recognize that by working together we can achieve our goal and complete the charge assigned to us. Our collaboration is strongest when all of us participate and cooperate.
Right, those are the 5 that I pulled out. Does anyone want to suggest anything that we're missing or a redefinition?
I thought something that was missing was, and it maybe is under listen or, I don't know which one of the major ones, but listen and understand other points of view and strive to understand. I think all too often we'll listen, we'll respect, but we don't make an effort to understand always. sometimes understanding where they're coming from makes it easier to collaborate and to work.
And I will note that that does come out under the second document, but it was very strong in the list, and so, and can you tell me the text that I should write down under it? You said something about listening carefully to understand other points of view?
Listen, we don't have listen really
Yeah.
here either. Listen and understand, or maybe strive to understand other points of view.
Okay. Any others that you'd like to have included or changed? This is how you identify the task, your work as a task force. We'll have another chance if you later on come to think about it and you want to change it. Let's go on to proposed working agreements. This is how the group works together. Agreeing right up front as you're beginning to embark on how do you communicate? How do you, a lot of it's about listening and understanding. How do you include diverse perspectives? How do you create a team culture that goes back to those values so that the values are exemplified in the way the work's done? It's very much about clear rules that some groups have a dynamic where everybody talks at once and where people talk over each other. Others are very, very formal in how they communicate. So this is setting rules that you can abide by that help you to exemplify the values of respect, inclusion, participation, listening, all of those that were mentioned. So these were things, once again, that I pulled out of that list and tried to turn into a value statement. I wish Tiffany had been able to do it because she wanted to, but I didn't want to wait another month. I'm trying to figure out how to work with this very sensitive computer. I'm trying to do it. There we go. All right. So if I could have, anyone want to read it out loud? Anyone want to? Anyone volunteer to read it out loud? There you go.
We will approach the work with open minds and with respect for everyone's viewpoint. We will encourage everyone to participate. We will listen actively to each other. We will share airtime. We will honor views that may not be in agreement with our own. We will respectfully ask questions and seek clarification.
You can keep going.
All right.
There weren't other people jumping at this.
We will come prepared to work and follow through on the work we commit to do. We will share all relevant information in order to make the best decisions possible. We agree that if we miss a meeting, we will support the decisions made in our absence.
That one didn't come from the list. I added that. So, any comments on these?
I feel that there needs to be a commitment for all of us to really put our time in and realize that all of our time is valuable, so we show respect for each other by being here when we're supposed to be.
Tell me if I'm getting this right, okay?
Good.
It was more time thing. Be here on time.
Yeah.
Or when we're called to be there.
That's explicit. Okay. Any others?
Can you explain what you mean by airtime?
Oh, very
I think
good.
about TV.
Yeah. In a group, in any group, there's people who feel very comfortable expressing their views, and there's often people who have a harder time, who need some quiet before talking or who need to process their thoughts. And so we have to find ways to make sure everybody gets a chance to share that space. Now we could change the term and just say we will give everybody a chance to speak their mind or anything like that. You like that better? We will give everyone a chance to speak their mind? Or everyone a chance to speak, how about that? Now, oftentimes we'll separate into small groups to have conversations, and that's because some people are more comfortable talking in small groups, and it's a way to have more generative conversations and then coming back and sharing it. So if somebody's not comfortable speaking in a large group, they'll have a chance to share their ideas in a smaller setting. Any objections to these? Will this help with conversation and with moving the process along? Okay, so what I'm going to ask then is, at every meeting, we'll type this up on a big sheet of paper and review it really quickly, and then I'll just ask for, is everyone okay with this? That's the thumbs up. Does anyone have some concerns about it? Do you reject it? Just to make sure that we're all in agreement, and that way we can always come back to it and say, okay, we agreed to do this, so we're going to come back. So, can I see if people are in agreement to these working rules? Anyone's ambivalent, not quite sure? Anyone reject them? Okay, then we can move forward. Okay.
Thank you.
And it's, yeah, I'm going to leave that.
Yeah, and I'd like to take the time to introduce Matt Curis. Matt is one of my colleagues from the Center for Community and Economic Development at the University of Wisconsin Extension, and he specializes in GIS and economic analysis related to geography. Works on a statewide basis. I think you've worked in every county in
All
the state.
72, yeah.
All 72, so you've got a vast and wide experience. When I go out to other places and present on my own, and I say I'm from the Center for Community and Economic Development, people say, oh, you work with Matt. So you've got a reputation, a famous reputation for the work that you do.
Or infamous.
Or infamous, yeah, possibly. But I'm excited that you're here tonight, and thank you so much for being here, and I think we're ready to go.
All right, great,
All right.
thank you. Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Matt Curis, and I am a Community Development Specialist with the Center for Community Economic Development. As Kristen mentioned, I work across the state of Wisconsin with Sharon and her colleagues, along with state agencies and regional economic development organizations and community groups such as yourselves. And Kristen asked me to step in tonight to talk a little bit about commuting patterns for the village of Waunakee, and I think it'll really build on the discussion you had last time in terms of amenities, and it'll also I think raise some additional questions you may have about what it might mean for developing new housing in Waunakee. Commuting is something I've worked quite a lot with over the last 5 years or so. I did a lot of research in St. Croix County looking at the new bridge between Minnesota and Wisconsin, looking at how that might influence commuting patterns and what it might mean for community development there in terms of new housing, new amenities, new services that might be needed. And I've also spent a lot of time looking at this phenomenon called stretch commuting, or people commuting very long distances from their place of work to the place of employment. And that'll actually build on some of the conversation we have later in the presentation. So we can think about commuting patterns, we can think about people that may be living in Waunakee and commuting somewhere else, or we can think about the people that may be working in Waunakee that are commuting from other places. And we can look at this in terms of kind of the raw numbers in terms of whether or not there might be an imbalance of people commuting in from other places, or the number of people that may be living here that may be working somewhere else. So this is the number of people that work in Waunakee regardless of where they come from. Some of these people also live in Waunakee, but a lot of them come from other places as well. And one thing you'll notice is that we definitely see the influence of the recessionary periods. We saw a decline in the number of people working here in 2007, 2008. Saw it bounce back a little bit in 2009, 2010, 2011. Came down a little bit in 2012 and has started to slowly creep back up to the pre-recessionary periods that we saw in the early 2000s, but we're still not quite there. And you'll see that in 2015, which is the most current data we have access to right now, we should be getting more current data over the next several months, hopefully. We're just about 4,000 people that work in Waunakee. These are people that physically work in an establishment here in all sorts of different industries in the village of Waunakee. Now this data set can be a little bit fuzzy from time to time, so it may be that certain employers that are located just within the Waunakee boundaries may not actually be showing up here, and vice versa. So keep that in mind, that we're kind of looking at broad trends and not necessarily the specific numbers down to the exact decimal point. Okay, so what about the number of people that live in Waunakee that have a job somewhere? They could also work in Waunakee, but they could commute to many, many different places. One of the things you'll notice is that there is a very large imbalance between the number of people that live here with a job and the number of jobs that are actually located here. You'll see if we go up to 2015, there's not quite 2 to 1, but we're getting pretty close and the gap is getting bigger. So again, there are many more people with a job that live here than there are jobs that are located here. So that means that they have to go somewhere else. Even if everyone wanted to work in Waunakee that lived here, it would be impossible for them to do so because there simply isn't the number of jobs available. Does that all make sense? This can be a little bit confusing to even me sometimes, and I'm very close to it. And I would say that, yes, I was going to say, if anyone has a question, please feel free to interrupt.
Does that statistic where you're at with the 4,000 include what Todd likes to call lone eagles, those who have their independent, self-employed status?
It does not, and that's a very excellent question. This is what's called covered employment. So people that work for an employer that pays unemployment insurance, which does not include self-employed, and also does not include a lot of agricultural establishments in terms of agricultural production. That said, it covers about 96% of total employment in the United States. So it's a very, very broad coverage in terms of who it does include. But it does not include self-employed. So we can also look at it in terms of where people are going to and coming from within the village. So these are people that work in the village of Waunakee, and again, there's about 4,100 of them. Where do they come from in terms of their place? Well, we can see only about 20% of the people that work here also live here. We see that City of Madison accounts for about 18%, Sun Prairie, DeForest, Windsor, City of Middleton, so on down the line. It's not probably a big surprise as where these folks are coming from. That said, if we get down here outside of the top 10, there's almost 40% of people that aren't even included in these top 10. So they are coming from many, many different places around the village of Waunakee. Which also means that when you're thinking about where labor comes from, it's not just necessarily in your backyard. As we'll see in a minute, it's increasingly people traveling incredibly long distances to work in places like Waunakee and other places. All right, so people that live here with a job, where do they go to? There's about 7,200 of them. The number one destination for employment, no big surprise, is the City of Madison with about 43% or just over 3,000 workers. Number 2 is Waunakee, and then Middleton, Westport, Sun Prairie, DeForest. You see that there's 121 people that go to Milwaukee. So again, people are willing to travel incredible distances for certain types of job opportunities and other factors that we'll talk about here in a minute. And again, the top 10 only counts for about 25% of destinations for people that live here with a job. So again, we have this imbalance between the number of people that work here and the number of people that live here that are employed somewhere regardless of their place of employment. We can also do this by county instead of just looking at place. So this is county residents. Again, these are people that are working in the village of Waunakee. What county do they live in? Well, about 75% or 70% of them work in Dane County or come from Dane County. Again, probably not a big surprise. Columbia, Sauk, nearby counties, again, probably not a big surprise there. But we have people coming from Rock, we have people coming from Milwaukee, Dodge, Walworth, Greene, Iowa, Waukesha. So again, a lot of it's in our backyard, but some of it is not. Okay, what about people that reside in Waunakee? What county they're employed in? Well, again, very large share is employed in Dane County, but we see the next biggest county is actually Milwaukee County.
Next biggest county after that is Waukesha County. So again, these are people that aren't just traveling to the next community over necessarily. These are people that are willing to travel long distances. Yes, I saw a question.
Are these people traveling every day, or do some of them work from home and then travel once a week or once a month?
So that's what we can't get at, but it's, from my experience, it's a mixed bag. So maybe be people going every single day, but other times it may be an individual that telecommutes a couple days a week and needs to go into the office physically for another couple days of the week. It may be somebody that, again, speaking from anecdotes, one of the things that kind of got me into some of the long distance commuting analysis that I'll talk about here in a minute is that I was filling up my car with gas in Rice Lake, and I was talking to the guy next to me on a Sunday night. And I was asking him, where are you going? You know, what's up with you? And he said, I'm actually a contractor. I live in Rice Lake, but I commute to Chicago every single week because I can make more money there than I can back here at home. My uncle worked for the GM plant in Janesville. And when it shut down, he was given the option to either take an early payout or he was 5 years from his full pension. So instead of taking the early payout, he got into his truck with 4 other guys from the GM plant, and every Sunday night they drove to Fort White, Indiana, and came back on the weekends. So again, it's kind of a mixture in terms of what people's occupations may be, what industries they are, and what their other situations may be. Any other questions on this? Okay. What about trends over time? So these are Waunakee residents. Where do they work? Over time, we can see that the share of people that have a job that are living in Waunakee, Madison's been fairly high. It bounced around about the same in the early 2000s, declined a little bit with the recession, picked back up, but has actually come down a little bit over the last few years. People that work elsewhere actually now make up the biggest share of people that live in Waunakee, that don't work in Madison or don't work in Waunakee. You can kind of see that trending up over time a little bit over the last 5 years or so. The share of people that live in Waunakee that also work in Waunakee has been coming down for some time. Really since before the recessionary period. Again, we see this big blip here due to the economic downturn, but the overall downward trend is that there is a smaller share of employees working in Waunakee establishments that also live in Waunakee. So we're depending upon outside labor at an even greater rate. So these are workers that are employed in Waunakee, where their place of residence. So again, we can see that the overall share that live in Waunakee that also work here has been coming down, as I mentioned on the previous slide. The share coming from Madison has bounced up and down a little bit, but has pretty much hovered around 20%. Is down a little bit from what we saw in the early 2000s. The share that are living elsewhere that are commuting into Waunakee went up prior to the recession, has since then pretty much bounced around about 63% or so. So again, if you think about the share that are living in Madison versus the share that are living in Waunakee, that makes up a sizable component of your labor force for people in the village. Yes?
Just a couple questions. You're talking about this drop, and I saw the drop in one of the previous ones. It was significant, and was it from 2006 to 2007? It wasn't in 2008. What happened in 2006?
Started.
No, well, it had to be something that somebody had to.
Was there a major
Was
facility
there a
closure
local
or something like
facility,
that?
somebody
or-
leave in town? I just can't think of what it was, but it's
Yeah,
When did Marshall Ornament leave?
Marsh. There we go. And that, how many people were employed there? There was many.
if you were waiting to cross at 4:15 when they went home, you couldn't cross as they came out of work.
So that's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah.
Okay, starting in 2006, I don't know, it was a pretty sudden drop. But 2006, at that when Marshall Ornament closed, that was a huge employer at the time.
Yep.
So that may be your indication there.
Could be,
One employer in a small community can show up on the graph.
Absolutely. Did you have another question? You said you had a...
No, that was all I had. Well, it was two. It was why
Why
that
didn't
one
you
didn't
move?
have an employer.
Yeah.
So what drives all these patterns? And it's going to be different for every single community. But when you think about when people are choosing where to live versus where to work, those decisions are also often made jointly. It's not one or the other. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times people are weighing all these different locations where they could live or work based on a kind of a decision matrix that maximizes their return to their household in a lot of different ways. So economists would call this a utility function. So what are the choices I make that maximizes my personal utility and my personal benefit based on things like housing costs and housing characteristics, which I know that's of great interest to you. Quality of life, some of this goes towards amenities, some of it goes towards community characteristics, some of it goes towards social connections. So a lot of times you'll see people that live in one place and commute a long distance that do not want to move because their family's there, their friends are there, their business networks are there. So they may not want to make that change just because they can get a little bit closer to their place of employment or for some other reason. Dual income households. We see sometimes people are trying to split the difference between one spouse working here and one spouse working there. So again, it's kind of mutually inconvenient for both of them, but it makes it easier on their overall household. The probability of finding employment. Do they pick a community where they think they can find a good job opportunity? Wage differentials is a big one. Can I make more in one place versus another? And will that difference offset the costs I have in terms of commuting in both? Commuting costs directly, in terms of money, as well as the time I spend commuting. Demographics. A lot of times birds of a feather flock together. People want to live in a community that shares their values and is very similar to how they perceive themselves. And then again, travel costs and time. When people make these decisions, we like to think that we're rational consumers, but we're not always rational. So there may be certain ones that outweigh many other ones by individuals. And one individual may choose to weigh these differently than another individual. So again, we can consider all these, but there may be outliers that choose differently. So people often like to talk about travel time, commuting time, as a measure of kind of community desirability or as a possible friction for people wanting to live in one community and travel to another or vice versa. I don't think commuting time is a very good measure for a couple reasons. First of all, it only considers those individuals that live in a community versus where they go. It doesn't include the travel time of people that are commuting into your community. It's only for the residents of that community. It's also based on your own personal perspective. So I'm sure if you've lived in Dane County for a long time like I have, you've seen commuting times go up, you've seen traffic go up, and I think we like to complain a lot about it, right? Traffic's terrible. And if you look at Waunakee and some of the selected Dane County communities I chose here, yeah, the mean travel time for residents of Waunakee is towards the upper end. But what if we compare it to, say, the 20 largest metropolitan areas in the entire United States? It's all about context. Travel times here are much, much, much worse than they are in a place like Dane County. So if you're coming from another place to live here, you probably laugh at our travel times. But if you lived here your entire life and saw the changes, you probably complain about the travel time. So again, it's all about your personal context. So we can also look at imbalances in monthly earnings. The dark blue bars are the average, or excuse me, the share of individuals with certain monthly earnings for people that live in Waunakee. The light blue bars are people that live in Waunakee. What share of those, or excuse me, the share of individuals that work in Waunakee, what share of those makes different monthly earnings? And to be honest, the categories that the Census Bureau gives for monthly earnings isn't great, but it's what we have to work with. So here we have the first category, which is an individual making $1,250 per month or less. Here we have $1,251 to $3,333 per month, and more than $3,333. So if we look at people that live in Waunakee, about 22% of them make less than $1,250. About a quarter of them make $1,251 to $3,333, and over half of them make over $3,300 a month, 52% of them. What about people that work here? So people that are working in Waunakee, what are their wages that they're pulling in? Well, we can see higher share make lower wages, a higher share make median wages, and a smaller share, only 40%, make 33 per more. So of the people working here, they're making lower wages than the people living here. What does that mean for these individuals? That means they're probably going somewhere else to earn that money and bring it back here. So again, we have this imbalance between the types of jobs and their wages that are here versus the people that live here that may go somewhere else to get their wages. Does that make sense? Yeah. And part of that is probably due to the industry distribution that is located in Waunakee, the types of employers that are here. So here are people living in Waunakee. What industry are they employed in regardless of where they work? Number one, no big surprise, is healthcare and social assistance. Number two is educational services. Three, retail trade, manufacturing, hospitality, finance, insurance, real estate, and so on down the line. What about the types of jobs that are located here? What industries are they found in? So here you'll see some big differences. You'll see that a much lower share of individuals that work here are found in healthcare and social assistance. Probably not a big surprise. You don't have the big hospital systems, and you have certainly some ambulatory care and smaller providers, but it's not the healthcare center that some other communities are. Educational services about the same. Smaller share working in retail trade. A much larger share working in manufacturing. Again, that's probably not a big surprise. But here are some of the big ones that pop out to me. Finance, insurance, and real estate, fire. A higher share of individuals that work in that industry than those that are employed in Waunakee in that industry. Public admin, so government. A lot of those are probably commuting to downtown Madison for state government. Professional technical services, lawyers, accountants, scientists, engineers. High share of people that are employed in that industry that live here, but not a lot of jobs found here. Higher share in construction that are found here. Higher share of administrative services, waste management, remediation, and so on down the line. So one of the things that you find here is that people that live here, even though they may want to work here, there may not be that type of job that they're looking for located in Waunakee, and vice versa. So again, we have kind of this imbalance or mismatch between the people that live here versus the types of jobs that are found here. So I also mentioned quality of life as a consideration that people think about when they're choosing where to live versus where to work. Some of this certainly ties into the amenities conversation you had before in terms of school quality and life at leisure and housing stock and so on and so forth. It's also about things like childcare. Do you have childcare available for people that may be wanting to live here, or maybe people that may be living here and commuting somewhere else? It's about things like public safety. It's about civics and diversity. Again, these social connections that go on in communities that make a community a welcoming place for people to live. And certainly life on the road, some of the commuting options and issues that we're talking about here. So again, it's about amenities, it's about quality of life, it's about all these other things that go into a person's decision beyond just the basic economics of wages and jobs and community costs. And I also argue that all of these can be measured. There's not a single thing on here that could not be measured to see how you stack up versus other places that may be in competition for labor. So they mentioned schools. I mean, that's one simple way that we can think about how Waunakee might compare to other places, because certainly people are attracted to the quality of schools in Waunakee. So how do we stack up? These are the top 15 high schools in Dane County in terms of graduation rate, but there are many, many other statistics that are out there that can be used to assess school quality. Let's think about it in terms of age group. So these are people that commute to Waunakee from somewhere else, people that do not live here. What age group are they in? Well, you see the biggest share are workers ages 30 to 54, which is no big surprise because that's the biggest group anyway. One of the things you do notice, though, is that since 2010, that share is starting to decline a little bit. And it may be due to people's preferences in terms of who's commuting here, in terms of their age group, but it's also about a demographic shift. As the baby boomers get older, we're starting to see the share of the population age 55 and older start to go up. And one of the things you start to see here is that we're starting to see a bigger share of individuals that commute into Waunakee are age 55 or older. So that's not a big surprise. Correspondingly, we're also seeing a smaller share relative to the early 2000s of people under the ages of 29 that are commuting into Waunakee. We've seen it level off more recently, but again, it is below what we saw in 2002, 2003, 2004. The other thing that we're seeing is that if we look at people that are commuting into Waunakee in terms of the travel distances that they're facing, we see a growing share of individuals that are traveling more than 50 miles from their place of employment, place of residence to their place of employment. If we go through 2002 up through 2011, you see it bounce around a little bit. For the most part, it's between about 8 and 9%. Since 2012, we start to see it pick up to 11%, 12%, upward to almost 14% right now. So again, people are willing to travel increasingly long distances, not just here, but nationally. So this is some research we're doing right now. This looks at change in stretch commuting or individuals commuting more than 50 miles each way. In the upper Midwest, the 9 states in the upper Midwest, we see it went from 11% in 2002 up to about 14% in 2014, which we have here, which is about where you're at right now. The number of people commuting that long distance also increased fairly significantly. If we look at where these individuals that are, the share of census tracts that are designated, or that are, the share of individuals, excuse me, in a census tract that are commuting 50 miles or more each way, we certainly see them kind of around metropolitan areas. We see them not just in Wisconsin, but throughout the upper Midwest as well. But if we look at this over time and aggregate it to counties, we can really see how this has changed. There we go. All right. Here we have it 2002 by county. 2004, not much change. 2006, 2008, 2010, 2012, and 2014. So again, if you're thinking about where you're drawing labor from, it's increasingly from bigger and bigger distances. In reality, that chart that I showed before with 50 miles or more, it's really more like 100 miles or more. So if you look at the differences between people between 50 and 100 miles, there's not many people there. It's really about people traveling 100 miles or more as being significant in terms of travel distances. So what does this mean for Waunakee? If we look at terms of how these long distance commuters have changed by age, we can see that a significant change has been in people age 55 or older. So as people get older, they probably don't want to move, even if their employment opportunities have changed. They're willing to travel long distances to an employment opportunity because they don't want to move their family. They don't want to move their house. They've been settled there for a significant amount of time, and they simply don't want to move. Yeah, sure.
I want to ask a question on that. It looks like the trend for young people is similar. What's that saying?
So this is this is by earnings. Is this the one you're talking about?
The previous one.
The previous one?
It's hard to read after.
Yeah, you see it in terms of the share of total. The age 29 and older going up is a share of stretch commuters. That's a share of all stretch commuters. But in terms of the total stretch commuter, or I'm sorry, the increase in stretch commuters among that age group, we see some increase, but it's not nearly as big as we see it in some other age groups. And that's actually the age group that's getting somewhat smaller, just due to demographic shifts. And also by wages. We see that the increase in stretch commuters, this dark green line, people making more than $33 per month, has actually gone up much more than non-stretch commuters. So again, it is people that are older making more money that are willing to travel these long distances because they simply do not want to move to a new place for many of the reasons I mentioned before. What this also means is that overall we've seen kind of this downward trend in mobility in general. People do not want to move from one place to another as much as they used to. We like to talk about the United States as kind of being this hyper-mobile society, but we're really not anymore. If you look at the share of people that made any sort of move in 2015, comparing it to where it was in the 1970s, we're at one of the lowest points we've seen in terms of people moving from one place to another in the last 50 years or so. People moving across state lines, people moving across county lines as well has been on a decline. So again, if we compare it to where we were in the 1970s, much lower share of individuals that are willing to move from different states or move across county lines. Again, people are increasingly rooted in place and do not want to get up and move from one place to another for a whole variety of reasons, but that's an entire other conversation. But it certainly impacts what you're trying to do in Waunakee as a broad trend. So this is just one way we can kind of slice and dice the data. There is many more data sets that are available out there that we can look at if you have other questions or ideas or ways that you want to kind of think about commuting patterns. So, you know, as you have your conversation, if there are more data sets you want to take a look at, please let me know. I'm happy to try and put them together.
Have it by age group, because I'm thinking certain age groups are looking for good schools, or, you know, they're looking for different amenities than, you know, later in career, you know, 45 to 65, say, or the younger set that are looking for it. So has any of this been looked at by age group?
So we did a little bit by, in terms of like mobility rates, or just what how preferences change by age group?
By age, yeah.
So you can certainly dissect how all these different characteristics vary by age group. Certainly, as you mentioned, younger individuals are going to want schools, healthcare, family. You're right.
Say under 30, they're looking probably for more city life kind of.
The types of amenities change. I wanted to go back. Types of amenities that individuals are looking for change by life stage. But again, that's kind of a generalization. So I guess for me, thinking about people that are commuting into Waunakee by different age groups, if you look at that 30 to 54, and it is kind of a broad age group, so it doesn't really capture some of the nuances that are there. A lot of those individuals, even though it's becoming a smaller share, a lot of those individuals are probably those that are rooted in a lot of places already. I would say those that are 30 to 34, maybe 35 to 39 might be some of the mobile ones that are considering things like schools and household formation and so on and so forth. But a lot of the people in the older age groups, 40 to 55, they're probably stuck in place in a lot of instances. They're probably not going to move from one place to another unless there's some good reason for them to do so, because they can just commute from one place to another.
So the mobility really is like from 20 to 40?
Mostly I would say 24 to 35 is that kind of sweet spot for high mobility rates.
Under 24, there's a lot of moving too.
Well, a lot of them go to college, you know, so they don't move as much. It's, so it's,
So,
Jobs and all that.
right, yeah.
next question. If you, and you've done this study for more than just Waunakee, obviously you looked at this. If you look at communities our size, is this abnormal to have the particular one that struck out to me is the one that people that live here and work and the number of jobs that are here. Are we in balance? Are we way out of balance relative to communities our size?
No, especially those that are located around a large employment center like Madison. So if you took you're at what, about 12,000 people? Is that 13? If you took a community of 13,000 people in, say, central Wisconsin that didn't have a lot of other employment options around there, you might see more of a kind of even, you know, share of people living and working in the community. But the fact that you are outside a large employment center, many other communities, not just in Dane County, but across the country that are similar to your position are going to have these mismatches. Yeah, that's not uncommon at all. Yes?
So in a conference that I was at, they had a specific conversation about millennials. Mm-hmm. And the shift that happened with millennials, they go where they want to live and then find a job, as opposed to before it was where the job was is where you went to live. Is there any shifts that are happening outside of that right now?
So
it's still pretty consistent.
So this is an argument that economists have been debating for the last 3 decades. Do people follow jobs, or do jobs follow people? And a lot of it's driven by the millennial generation, and even before that, my generation with Gen X. The jury's still out whether or not people follow jobs, or jobs follow people. Kind of the consensus is that in a knowledge economy, so more higher education, certain types of occupations, that is those individuals that want to find a place to live first and then find a job, because they have the human capital or skills to kind of put themselves almost anywhere where that job opportunity may be.
Also, corporations have stopped transferring people all over the country.
There's certainly some of that as well. But for instance, younger folks that may be working in, say, manufacturing and construction, those folks are not very mobile at all. So there was a study that came out not too long ago that looked at people working in manufacturing, where they lived versus where they were born. Like, I'm going to get the number wrong, but it's something like 80% of people working in manufacturing live in either the county where they were born or 1 county away. So it really varies depending upon other characteristics other than just age. The next, I think one of the kind of challenges of talking about millennials or any generation is that we like to kind of put them into silos, but there's so many, nuances and differences among a huge generation like the millennials, where we can look for differences compared to prior generations, but they're all going to have kind of different preferences. For housing stock anyway, one of the things we're seeing with millennials is that they're delaying housing purchases compared to prior generations for a variety of reasons. People depended on things like student debt, lower marriage rates, and so on and so forth. But eventually we're starting to see those people in the millennial generation buying homes. It's just taking longer. So instead of buying at 28 or 29 or 30, they may buy at 35 or 36. So it's just kind of a shift in age, yeah.
And it's partly, they talked about amenities too, and quality of life.
Yeah.
I know the shift was, the concern in Wisconsin was they were moving out to the Minneapolises, the Denvers, the various spots like that. That was a common trend, and maybe that's shifted now.
So you just hit on one of the other areas of research that I do a lot of. We like to think about Wisconsin having a brain drain, this high rate of people, young educated people that are leaving the state for other places. We actually have one of the lowest out-migration rates of any state in the country for people with a college degree of almost every age group. We have a net loss of individuals, a net migration basis of people leaving the state, but the reason for that is that we do not attract them from other places. So even places like Colorado, places like Oregon, places like South Carolina that have high in-migration rates on a net basis for college grads, their out-migration rates are much higher than ours. They just have this constant churn of population coming and going. It's just that the people coming are much more than those going in any given year. So we have one of the most stable populations in the entire country. And in fact, if you look at the share of people that are born in the state of Wisconsin that live here, we have like the 7th highest share in the entire country of people that were born in the state that also reside here. So everyone that lives in Wisconsin is from Wisconsin. People that do move to Minneapolis, do move to Chicago, they're primarily going there certainly for amenities, but they also have a very thick labor market. So if you're a computer engineer and you have the choice to go to, say, Green Bay or Minneapolis, your job prospects in Minneapolis are much greater, and your career progression is much greater than it is in Green Bay, because you have many more job opportunities there. So that's the other missing part of the puzzle that people don't talk about. Amenities are important, but job market's important as well. Any other questions? All right.
Thanks, Matt.
Great, thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. We've digested it all, right? That's some amazing stuff, isn't it? That's great. So you have handouts, and if you have questions after Matt leaves today, you can let me know and I'll pass them on to Matt and get an answer for you. I know sometimes when I hear a lot of really rich information, it takes me a while to think of the questions that I want to ask. So email or call, you all have my phone number, or ask at the end of the day to day, and I'll relay those questions to you. Matt, I know you got a family to get back to. Right? Yeah, so we will.
Whether they want me to or not.
Yeah, we will let you go.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Yeah, or you can stick around too. Yeah. All right, so before we move on to our discussion questions, I wanted to touch on a couple of slides that Dan was going to discuss today, and he will discuss next month, that are related to what Matt just shared with us. So let me pull those up. And that's a little bit about growth, because while all of this is happening with in commuting and out commuting, we're also in, and any second there it comes, we're also in a region of the state that is growing and projected to grow. And that is not true of the entire state of Wisconsin, nor is it true of the entire upper Midwest or the rest of the country. So we're fortunate to be in that position on the one hand. On the other hand, when we're talking about housing, that creates certain pressure over the long term on what we can expect we'll need to provide as a larger community. So a few words about growth. Looking from 1970 to 2040, we can see that Dane County's population back, it's almost 50 years ago now, started out slightly less than 300,000, and we can see it's broken out in this graph. Green is rural areas. Reddish orange is the outlying cities and villages, Waunakee, Verona, Fitchburg, etc. Middleton would have been outlying back in 1970. And then central urban areas. Go all the way to, and it's broken out by 5-year increments here, so we're closer to 2020 than we are to 2015. But we can see we're somewhere slightly over 500,000 in that, what would that be? 50-year, or what will be a 50-year period, and give us another 20 years. I can't believe 2040 is only 20 years away, because once that would have been so far into the future, we'll be closer to 600,000. So in that 50-year period, we've almost doubled our population. One of the reasons we're seeing the growth we are, and we all know this because we lived through this for the most part, in our community and in and around Dane County, but this is what we can expect literally. Be people who are coming down the road and coming into Dane County and into our community along with others. So that's where we are headed. And when we look at how is that population expected, projected to break down, we can see that if we match these segments up here, you can see we go from, this group would have been baby boomers back then. This is older baby boomers, younger Gen Xers. Gen Xers and millennials now, older Gen Xers there. And that group is going to remain somewhat stable, our middle population. As compared to now, we all know that our population of 65 and older is expected to grow, so that has implications for the type of housing that people are going to demand. Not many people in the 65 and older category are necessarily planning for homes that could accommodate 6 or 7 children, maybe 6 or 7 grandchildren that come over the weekend, but not on a daily basis. And our younger population is growing, or is expected to grow again. This year's 17-year-old population, our high school seniors, those that were born in 2001, is one of the lowest birth rate years we've had in many decades. So we'll see that younger population from this point on starting to grow again. As millennials start to have children and have more children than Xers have, because they're a larger generation. Last slide before we get into our discussion points. So one of the implications of this is that the type of household, in terms of who lives in those households, is going to change. This is a graph that takes a bit of thinking, so let me walk you through it. It's got two axes. Over on this side, it said the number of households. Those are the red bars. So in 1970, we had, it looks like, about 90,000 households. Coming up to right about here, 2015, we're probably somewhere between 2 and 250. It looks like maybe we're at 230 or 240. By 2040, we're going to have over 250. It looks like probably 275,000 households. The blue dot, the black dots that are collected by the lines here, that trend line is the household size, and that's this axis. And we can see back in 1970, the typical household size, how many people lived in a single household, that would have been like prime baby boom teenager years. Like the younger middle baby boomers would have still been at home. The older baby boomers were probably starting their own homes and their own families at that point in time. We had 3.2 people with an average number of people in a single household in Dane County. Fast forward 50 years, or more than 50 years, to 2040, and it's 2.2, so one less person per household on average. And that reflects two things: an older population, fewer people living in a home because fewer people are raising children. And the second thing it reflects is fewer children in a household that has children, more 1 and 2 child families as opposed to 3 and 4 child families of 15, 20, 30 years ago. So that has implications for the types of housing units we think we'll need going up to 2040, and the type of housing units we think will be in demand. But overall, this feels like a really big number to me, right? 69,000. 69,000 additional households if we go 10 years off this graph to 2050. Wow, what do you guys think of that? Where are we going to put everyone? Yeah. All right, so more to chew on. These slides are in your slide deck that is an updated version of what was emailed out earlier this year, or this week. So it looks like that. Does anybody not have one of these? I'd like one. Okay, Kellen?
Is it online?
It's online, but there's some, oh, perfect, yeah. Yeah, the updated ones are not online, so these 3 are not online. Yeah. Take one? All right, they will be online after tonight. I added these in.
Those are there?
All right.
They weren't emailed to us.
Anyone else? You want one here?
On the website.
Pardon?
Did you just say they are on the website?
They're not on the website yet.
On the website.
Yeah. Which one?
I got it.
You got one? You got it? All right. All right. You'll take one? Okay. There we go. There we go.
Thank you.
Okie dokie. Sharon, I think we're ready to do some discussion. You guys ready to talk? Had enough listening to us? Yeah.
I have a comment to make.
Yeah.
A lot of counties or metropolitan areas would be very jealous of the 69,000 households. They're dealing with shrinking population.
Yeah.
That's probably more difficult, or at least more crisis oriented, whatever.
Yeah. There are a number of communities I'm working with up north that it's clear that their population has been trending downward and that there's no reversal for this. Things have just changed in the last 50 years. And there we're talking about how do you then keep a school open? How do you keep a hospital functioning? That's a hard problem.
Before we go on.
Yes.
I moved this slide back because I wanted to point out one interesting trend. If you can see that orange there, look at the width of the orange. That as time has gone by, the growth in population is more in the outlying cities and villages than it is in the central urban area for Dane County. So I think Madison, Fitchburg, Middleton, those areas had a lot of growth, and now it's going out further. So when housing is developed, increasingly developed in both internally to that central area, but also more so in those other places.
And it's fascinating to look at the graphs. The internal development is far denser than it was originally. It's this whole amazing infrastructure change that it amazing to watch. So, but one of the things we wanted to point out as we're going into this, and this connects with what Matt said earlier, this connects with what Dan will say next month, that goes back to what we talked about back in September. So a lot of what we're touching on is this concept, and this is another Kurt Paulson concept, and hopefully we'll get him out here to speak with us before the next few months fly by. But the geography of opportunity and the idea that housing diversity or the lack of housing unit diversity fundamentally shapes both the demographic structure of suburban communities, but also geographically structures the opportunities for all metropolitan households. And when we look at the commuting data that Matt showed us a few minutes ago, you can really see that with the commuting patterns, how the proximity to jobs shapes opportunity and shapes lives. Those folks that are commuting 100 miles or more, wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. So with that, I think we're ready for discussion.
Well, you guys already have cards. Everyone's got a card.
Oh, okay.
So we can play a card game.
Yeah. There's some over here.
Oh, you don't have a card? Okay.
Hand up if you don't have a card.
All
You
right.
win nothing with the card. Yeah. Anyone else?
It's actually not a card game, but this is a way to shift the groups that we're working with. So I'm going to ask anyone who has a heart to come here. This is complicated. Remember, anyone who's a spade to come here. Anyone who's a diamond to come here. Anyone who's a club to come here.
Yeah. Poor guy. Your ace is famous. Yeah, mine. I am. They're all diamonds. You're hanging out?
Diamonds in the sky.
Hello.
Club. I found this on the floor. Yeah, I'll take club and I'll club.
Okay. You.
What?
Well, let me come in here. It wasn't like that.
I'm fat.
Are you guys spades? Clubs. Okay, here you go. I'll grab your cards. Okay.
Yes, I do.
So hopefully you're sitting next to some people you haven't been sitting next to before.
Okay.
And give you a chance to get to know other people. I want to make sure we've got similar numbers. Okay, perfect. We have 3 discussion questions. And each one of you have the discussion question on your table. They're also up here. The spades have a blank sheet, and they get to write their own discussion question. But I'd like to ask, before we put that responsibility entirely on the spades, on the spade table, does anyone have a question related to what we've been hearing today and related to Waunakee's housing demand, housing trends, housing expectations for the future? Does anyone have a burning question that you've been really wanting to discuss? We got a couple up here. None?
Well,
Give them some ideas.
Question is probably a question, and that is the jobs that are listed. I'm sure they cover all the jobs, but I think about communities that don't have the big core, still have, even though there are people leaving here to go to work, they still have service needs. And it's their primary job may be somewhere else, but they're still going to spend money, they're still going to have needs in their smaller commute than the kind of miles we saw here. So, you know, those people that are driving 50 or 78 miles a day aren't going to necessarily get their hair cut or their groceries 78 miles away. So it just kind of seems like a question. I don't know even what the question is. It's an observation that there are, even though people are commuting away, there's still services that are needed. And obviously should equate to jobs, but.
Okay, let's.
How
accompanying lower income people in our community impacts businesses.
Okay, and also that's related to the service industries.
I mean, basically our housing stock isn't functional for lower income people. So how does that affect the businesses in our community?
Those are both terrific questions put together.
Okay, one of my concerns is, because I know many people who travel a long distance for 14, 15, 20 years, and what it does to their health.
So that issue of the commute, and what I'm going to do is let this table then craft their own question based on those three that you've just heard. Looking at maybe, I'm not sure about how to integrate the health one, but how does the lack of, or the paucity of housing for lower income affect the availability of services for residents? It might be tied in with health if people are leaving because they can't, well then they're not living here. But,
How does the lack of public transportation impact our housing stock now? And if it should change, how would it impact the housing stock in the future? Because
another question. So let me look at that.
In Madison, if they live here, they have to have a car.
They've got enough to ruminate on. They're going to pick their own question. You guys all have your question to discuss. Here's how this works.
I can remember. Okay.
1 second. Here's how this works. We came up with our conversational agreements early on, right? At each table, I'm going to ask you that you self-facilitate with those working agreements in mind, giving everybody a chance to participate, giving people the space to talk, so not jumping in too much, but to self-facilitate as you have this conversation. The second thing that I'm going to ask that you do, I'm going to come around with a flip chart for each one of you, is to record your major points. And then we're going to come back as a whole group and have a chance for the whole group to discuss. So each table will present their major points and open it up for questions to the whole group. Good? Okay. So start with introducing yourself to each other if you don't already know one another.
Robert, please.
Maria, hi.
Hello.
Susan.
We all
So, we're going to self-facilitate, because I know it's never a question. So that is and I just see it. What would you think of anticipated future community patterns on Waunakee? And how can this impact
Perfect. You decided that.
I'm trying to decide what they mean by mediated in a positive sense. Mediation sounds like you need to fix something. Well, I guess that's why I would say or be received, or what you want to call them. What is and then how can it be fixed? I think one of the big community things is if we look at public transportation, would enable people in Waunakee to work in Madison. You know, you have to have a car, and if you don't have a car, you're kind of working local.
Yeah, the future community patterns. I mean, it's kind of from all the data, people are driving out of Waunakee in droves.
You have to just drive out of Waunakee during rush hour.
Well, I know, yeah. I mean, go down Highway Q or 113 or Main Street.
And that just talks about the quality. What's happening with our quality.
Yeah, it's
Plus, we have group actors.
That's the mediation.
Oh, no, I was for before, I'm sorry.
12 back in.
I know, so, no.
It's starting from the vantage point. It's the group
It's not the destination.
That'd be great if I put it
You look very nice, by the way.
Hard 12.
Date night.
I've been talking for decades, maybe, or at least a decade about this. I've got, it's sorely needed, and that would be a mediation. I would think for the commuting patterns, I don't know what that has to do with.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I knew that. So ridiculous.
Well, I mean, we've kind of been labeled kind of.
I didn't want to do
That's definitely.
Well, that's fairly new thing, though. I would say probably half the population here, most of that. So it's right now, newcomers, people that are firmly established, probably won't, or maybe they work in but, you know, this was a manufacturing agricultural 20 years ago. And the population was, what, 3,000? So it's different, so.
Well, it's definitely different.
Our housing needs so far, our housing growth has been in family for children, I mean, so, and senior housing, building houses. So, what does it have to do with community?
So, I mean, first of all, what's the impact? We want our businesses to grow, and their employees want to live here. It's a
More, I mean, exactly. It's just gonna
More traffic.
I don't see it unless we do get public transportation. I mean, if we, let's just say something radical happened. Like we had a
skills are, the education needed,
Madison.
you're talking.
I mean, that would completely change things. At least that's my opinion.
Well, and especially when we have this, they can't find enough people who have been, you know,
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these buildings have to do with permanent now hiring sign on their buildings. In Waunakee, Windsor, all this around here, they'll just
People don't want to be recognized, they want to be manufacturing, but they're not really covering that.
such a trend. It's such a lucrative job. I mean, it's a real good income for
So I don't know if that's.
Right, yeah.
Is that what I'm writing down?
Well, there's a huge trend away from that. You know, technology.
Even from the trade.
I mean, it kind of got away because, you know, people want to, so to speak, roll up their sleeves. Imagine.
No, I mean, I'm on the high end of their
Okay.
I'm like the very first year of 1980.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, I could say that they're definitely focused on, professional services education, rather than photech
back in, things like that. Not that it was outright discouraged, but our generation, a lot of it was our parents say, go to college and get the 4-year degree.
As hard as I did to get what you want.
I don't know if I heard that so much from my parents, but it was more of just, it was the whole mentality of you can do better than the generation before you. And I think in our parents' mind, to them that meant you go into academic, or 8-year, go and get your master's doctorate and take those types of jobs. Don't do what I did, walking up empty stairs both ways.
You have more opportunities available to you.
Right. Now, the reality is that things didn't happen because a lot of us graduated around, started graduating around right after 9/11, right into the recession. I would say a lot of us did not have these skills over. So as they were talking about millennials deferring buying houses, yes, they're all out student debt, and the promised jobs from college didn't exist. And at that point, a lot of people felt like, and some of my friends actually went into vote 10 when they realized that they done their college degrees. But for a lot of them at that point, they saw this the additional cost. And it's interesting you guys are bringing up about the apprenticeships and things like that. And as far as thinking about the community patterns, my question is, and I don't know how much these apprenticeships are paid, but if you can't afford to live in Waunakee on the apprenticeship, you're going to go into Madison and maybe commute in Waunakee. It's fair to assume that maybe you get a car, not the nicest car, you can commute in. But I'm a firm believer in labor mobility and labor economics. You're going to get comfortable with your area, and so you might like to grow to like the lifestyle for a younger age in Madison, and you look at Waunakee and you're like, there's no clubs out here, there's exciting.
Rex has some pretty good.
So compared to the States,
it's just not as
That's not the same.
So, and I'm not casting aspersions on the area. It's just
no. Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And so, what I'm thinking though is that, if you can't afford to, build the housing the style that's being built out here, but you see, some of the other communities around us that are catering towards first-time homebuyers, it kind of makes it's like, wow, it would be really nice to live there one day, but not right now because I can't afford it. Even if I work out there, they might still get it. So, and I'm saying that I'm excluding people below that can't afford a car. Sorry, I know.
No, that's a good perspective, though, to look at it in the sense that, people go through phases in their life that they do.
She was saying that younger generations, especially, they don't plan to stay in one place their whole life. Yes, that's something.
That's by necessity a lot of times, though. Yeah. They don't probably choose to.
I lived with my parents in Maryland for
yeah, right. I have a 20-year-old.
Locked the house and said, come back and
move right back.
Of course, once they got a job.
Yeah, it was I think you're right.
I assure you, you don't want that.
Right, yeah.
They didn't have a job.
Right, yeah.
Easier than going out and finding a job.
You can switch gears. You can, sometimes I think you do things out of necessity, but.
Or they fill up like that.
Sorry.
You're elected, Maria.
Okay.
You have anticipated the future of your community.
But yeah, just figure out kind of like a target number, whatever to get the village to go.
Yes.
Whether or not they have work.
Because we didn't really answer that question.
No. What would be the impact of anticipated future community taxes?
If they don't have something.
Too much traffic.
Yeah, it's just
Traffic.
And they have
traffic, too much and will increase. It's definitely going to increase.
controversy.
Yeah. I mean, a greater imbalance of those who live and work in Waunakee versus those that commute out.
Would that be due to commuting patterns?
Well, yeah, because, I mean, when they're talking about the community patterns, they're talking about
Imbalance.
they're talking about, you know, being like balance to how many people are coming in to work here versus those who are living here and leaving. And they're talking about that, you know, it's like that chart that they showed
So
earlier.
what would the commuting patterns would more encourage people to stay here because the commuting's so hard?
They'd be coming to Waunakee and not
Maybe living
instead
and
of
working.
leaving to go to work.
Right, but I think what they're showing is that they're trying to, unless something changes, it's just going to be continuing to get worse in that more people are going to move in and use your term, the better. Get treated as such because professional citizens are work.
Right. So,
And it's going to be the health desk.
yeah, you can tell when you're
I can
going.
name probably 5 people that work out of their home and travel all over. So Waunakee is their office and their home.
Most people are going out of Waunakee early in the morning. They're not coming into Waunakee.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
So,
For 3.5 years, I worked for a
oh wow.
and I did not make the commute every day. And I went to the job in Springsport, and I bought a condo up there as a getaway place.
Okay.
And so I stayed up there for a week. I went up on Sunday night if the weather from Monday morning was supposed to be bad. Otherwise, I went on Wednesday, came back here on Tuesday, went back on Wednesday, came back here on Friday. So, you know, I was able to
Well, I'm a government official, so I think that I think that
100 miles a day.
Oh yeah.
It was literally 50 miles.
So yes,
I would get up at 45, so I was out of the house by 15, and I had 5:15 in my grubby clothes, got up to the condo at 6:15, and then went through my normal morning.
I'm not sure what for work.
No, we're not.
Yeah, my wife goes to Portage.
I was always going against the traffic, everything was down from the counter, and I was going up. And the other day, I was going against the tide.
From where? Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
For 10 years. But I had a place to stay.
Yeah, I never commuted that far. 10
My
miles.
logic was, some people here in Chicago area travel over an hour to get from one side of Chicago. Yeah,
That's true. I started my career in
And
Washington.
out east, yeah, out east.
That's how I was laughing when you showed the chart, the traffic, and they showed DC number 2. I was like, yep.
Yeah.
And that was an average.
Yeah, I took
30, that was 30 some miles. Yeah, 2 hours each way. Wow. Dang. I wouldn't do it. I just wouldn't do it. I don't like to drive that much.
What is it all? So how does that impact our housing?
I was one of those people who moved out here.
Or aren't we supposed to address that? What's the impact? What will be the impact? In relation to what?
So you're a
Relation to
bank,
travel,
you're
in
a
relation to
banker,
housing,
you're
in relation
I really is in relation to one.
And there was opportunities here. Yeah. So
Yeah.
probably don't make as much, but as DC.
So, the mediation would be the North Freeway.
It's all relative. Yeah. Actually, with the cost of everything, you probably have more money in your pocket than
Or public transportation.
Yeah, but it's
not substantial. Yeah, okay.
But
Right, yeah, that's important.
I'm a compliance officer for Community Bank that owns a mortgage company in Massachusetts. So the Community Bank is based out of North Florida. And for some reason, I decided to own a mortgage company. So
There you go.
they were very odd arrangement. It's worked out.
So you're back on some banking.
No, yes, it's all planned. It's not glamorous. It's not glamorous, it's not. Not what I do, I'm not a
Well, I know, my son's in banking and mortgage stuff, so I don't have time to do
Would part of the mediation be more jobs that people could volunteer in town?
We tried to do a tear down.
Yes, I mean, if you're trying to stop people from leaving.
Right, have more here for them to stay for.
Yeah.
What kind of jobs? Because there's like jobs now we can't fill.
Right.
Have some
What are they though? I don't know. Or maybe we could start like the techie.
Let's, service, I mean, if they're talking about the service job, I hate to say it, but it's like where you get everybody from manufacturing that works for service jobs, so, you're talking about like the lawyers, the doctors, that's the type of people that, attract out there. There's nowhere for them to work, they want to go. At first.
You bring up an interesting point. One of the things in the comprehensive plan talks about those 57 acres of land.
I guess I asked for the town.
There's nothing there. There's nothing there.
Oh, you talk, before you get to like River Road, on the right hand, Taylor's Liquor and that.
There's a whole area where they're parking boats right now for winter.
Right.
I just assume Skipper Buns are.
No, it was,
Future and it's not there anymore.
That would be an effort in Westport to work and develop not technical, what is it, techie or...
well, Amazon maybe will put something up there.
We're not one of the cities under.
Have you been out to south of Milwaukee?
Oh, is it a big distribution center?
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's highways.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You can tell the town is built around it.
Oh, okay. I don't know that I've seen it. That's in where? Johnson?
It's south of Milwaukee. It's like where you get to.
Oh, okay. No, I haven't been down there, so.
Foxconn?
No, just the Amazon distribution. Yeah.
Could we get one here?
But I mean, I don't know that that's the type of job they want because there's, they pay $15 an
I think
hour.
developing a technical park and giving incentives
It's hard when people.
I mean,
you all like to, they seem to pull together, and if you have more it could be the Silicon Valley.
Yes, the areas.
Right, yeah. I mean,
Why not?
it's all possible.
It's called the North
Well,
Mendoza
I mean, you've
Energy
got a
and
great
Technology.
Yeah, connect with the university, more connection with.
All 57 acres are currently available. It's been advertised that for years, and nothing has happened.
So, I mean,
can we do like a tax better system?
Is it because there's too much traffic at that intersection?
Best minds,
Let them in.
goals are brains.
there's no reason why we should be cashing in on that.
So, do you develop industries that will to attract, no, not commuters, that induce people to live here. So, I wouldn't say local workers, I'd like people to work here. You know, like, so say a technical business, what is it called?
You can say attract/retain professionals. I don't want to sound, it sounds real stupid.
They're not technical
Service,
industries.
yeah, like service industry.
Technical industries, so that are making computers or making, I don't know if they have research going on at work that might be developed.
High tech or cutting edge.
They're not high. They're at the fleet farm. At the fleet farm.
Yeah, definitely service. That's each other.
Well, but I believe that's against our growth plans that have a big box.
But that, well, big box is one thing. But to hear some of the questions that they are raising is, if people are further away, are they going to want to be able to drive farther for the things they use on a daily basis? Because they're going to change some of their uses. Kind of. Ben Franklin. We have additional grocery store.
I also.
No.
Well, it's always best for everyone, really. I mean, I don't care if you're each other. It makes you better. What?
How are you doing? Yes, 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes.
Spectrum of different the business park where the industrial park took off like by that.
Really? Manufacturing, correct?
Well, some of them are service jobs, some of them are there's
That's more than manufacturing. They manufacture and systems.
We're gonna have,
they just had somebody roll the report.
Sure. They have their whole process is to bring fresh air into big buildings. Well, it's more of air handling, large, and better than
So close to my writing now. Did I do that?
They're going like that. You know, we do have some industries here, and people don't see these.
Yeah, and I didn't realize it was that long ago.
I guess so.
if you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. If you can hear me, clap 3 times. Thank you. So I think every group had enough time to at least get a few things up. Before we talk about what's at your table, let me ask you, how did you do with self-managing a conversation where everybody got a chance to speak? Everyone got a chance to...
Maybe just talk a little.
Give yourself a grade. Did every table get an A for participation? Happy with it? Very good. What we're going to do right now is have each table give a summary of their question, their discussion points, and then open it up for a little bit of give and take around each one of the questions. And I'm going to record.
Do you want me to?
No, we'll just record, or you can record on the computer actually, so that we've been taking notes at all the meetings just to the conversation topics, and so we can then feed that back to you at a later time. So, this table, do you have somebody who wants to volunteer to lead the discussion?
Ready? All right. Here's our question. What is the impact on local existing businesses by Waunakee not having a housing for, we struggled with this word, living wage or low income workers? So again, what is the impact on local existing businesses by Waunakee not having housing for living wage or lower income workers. So we came up with really 2 bullet points. We had a lot of conversation that kind of ebbed and flowed around a lot of topics, but I think we landed on, first of all, just not having enough people to fill the types of jobs that would fit into folks who would be living in that level of housing. And then second of all, that there's not a housing market for folks who are making the $10 to $12 an hour as a worker. So that was kind of we don't have any solutions, but we saw that these were kind of some of the areas that we would struggle with, kind of looking at our local housing market and how that really plays in with livable wages.
Randy, what was your first one? I'm sorry.
Not enough people to fill jobs, and no hard housing market for $10 to $12 an hour workers. That's what we got.
Go ahead. Do you want to invite comments,
I will
questions?
invite comments, absolutely.
What was the question? Sorry.
We had to treat
Well, they
our
were
own
all up
questions.
there nicely, so.
You were handed one. Okay, what is the impact on local existing businesses by Waunakee not having housing for lower income workers?
So you basically surmise that there's a negative impact on existing businesses.
We also focused on, we brought it to existing because if we talk about new businesses coming in and trying to recruit new businesses, that's a totally different animal with what we're talking about. So we had a hard time with the question, since we were kind of given the question to try to formulate it, but it's, so we're more focused on our existing business at this point.
Not enough people to fill jobs, isn't that driving the wages up? These companies are crying for work. They're decent paying jobs.
Well, that was at Buck and Honey.
That was in Sun Prairie.
In Sun Prairie, yeah.
They did what? Did they do?
They actually, according to what we heard at the housing summit, they paid their employees $300 a month extra to keep them at their job so they could afford the rent there.
They gave the money towards the rent.
Towards their living,
So
yes,
it's
towards
a
their
rent.
living expenses, yes, in Sun Prairie.
Well, yeah, but right now, I mean, they can't get people to work there. There aren't enough people to fill these jobs, so the wages are gonna go up supposedly and attract more people into the area, even if they commute in.
The theory is that you have a
The
tight
theory
labor
is,
market.
but I don't
wages
think
go
that
up.
you're finding that at McDonald's or.
No, not at McDonald's, I'm talking about the business park, the
Business
industrial
park.
park.
We don't have to define what type of businesses we're talking about, I mean,
Yeah.
right?
And they can't find enough
Entry
people to
level
work at
versus,
McDonald's either.
yeah.
So
But they
Chris,
put
put on-
$10 to $12
Right.
an hour workers.
Is that, Mary, hold on to your thought for a moment, because we got
Right
commentators.
now, if you go down Main Street, Waunakee, there's one fast food restaurant that, as far as I know, they don't have their dining area open to eat. They have the drive-thru open because they cannot find workers. And their sign says hiring, I believe it says now it's gone up to $11 an hour.
Wages are going.
So we talked about that, that was another dynamic. We talked about the services industries to CNAs, all the different ways. Out into the industrial park, we go up into your $20, $30, $40 an hour.
Right.
And then we kind of brought it back into, Randy brought up teachers, that most of the new teachers that are coming in don't live in Waunakee, unless they have another significant other that can afford to have them be in Waunakee. So there's a large dynamic here of what we consider low income, I guess is where we're at with that. Because I'm assuming a starting teacher is around
$40,000.
$40,000 a year. So,
So that's kind of what I was saying, they have $10 to $12 an hour workers, and those types of jobs, they don't tend to pay any more than 10 to 12, and you're talking like the McDonald's and that's looking up and down Main Street for places, the restaurants, the service industry kind of places. They're not going to pay more than that, whereas an entry-level teacher is going to get 40, but
it's not just the services, you can go to grocery,
Right.
workers, and a lot of those jobs are being filled by high school students.
Yeah.
Maybe college students if they're coming back out here, getting those wages.
Same thing
And
with
that-
the fast food.
And that was my question specifically of Randy. I'm wondering statistically, how many of the high schoolers actually have jobs that can be, filled in some of these areas? That was a question that I was wondering.
And I'll lean on Hannah a little bit because she's, and Sam, wherever you are. But from what I see is you've got kind of a mix of kids working.
Yeah.
You've got some kids that are working a significant amount because they're looking to see how they need to have money to support what their, either just their social life or going on to school. And you have a lot of kids who are, and help me out here guys, but that are so busy with school and other activities that they don't work.
Yeah.
And then there's things that are being filled in with just supplemental income from their parents and their households because they're at a higher level. That's kind of what I see.
Yeah, I think
That's kind of what I thought, but I appreciate the
that's my
verification
guess.
of that.
Okay, so we got a couple things going here. We've got that, there's businesses, service businesses where the wages have not gone up significantly. We've got professionals who aren't making enough money for the housing mix. High school students may be filling some of those jobs, but not enough, so a lot of unfilled jobs. So a lot of things on the table here.
I was going to say, there are a lot of seniors in these service jobs. More and more of the seniors working checkout at the Piggy Wrigley or Walgreens and the fast food places.
I guess I find that same experience in high school. Some of my friends that didn't even need to work because of their family financial situation, but also the ones that live in these neighborhoods that can't necessarily get to work under the age of 16 without their parents taking them because they can't walk there.
So you're bringing in the transportation issues. Okay. You got all that?
I got all that.
Okay.
Yeah, we're at 23 after the hour.
Okay, so let's move on to the next table.
Whoa.
She's got a concert to go to. You guys ready to present your question and your...
Our question was, what will be the impact of anticipated future commuting patterns of Waunakee? And then how can this impact be mediated? So first of all, we talked about a lot of things that led to different parts of conversations. But the impact we definitely saw is there's too much traffic in town. And also that there will be potentially an increased imbalance with incoming traffic, outgoing traffic, but a lot of pass-through traffic that we're seeing more and more of. Mediation, we came up with just a couple of things. Public transportation potential, and something to do with that North Beltline that they've been talking about, dreaming about forever, that apparently there are meetings with Westport to talk about M and what could possibly happen there. And then we also talked about industries to attract or retain technical and service industries and retail in town. So those are some of our big things.
Great. And in the interest of time, we're going to cut the conversation and just go on to the next table so that we can honor the time frame you've set.
I got a comment.
Yep.
Don't say Beltline, please.
Oh, sorry.
Say Parkway.
Parkway, okay.
I knew Beltline wasn't right.
I knew that was.
Thank
Park at a driveway and drive
Our question was, as part of the capital region, what is the responsibility of the community to provide housing to accommodate future population growth per the projections? And what is the responsibility of the community to provide workforce housing, senior housing, and affordable housing? So we thought that we do recognize that as part of like the capital region, we should be actively trying to find housing or consider it.
People who work here should have the opportunity to live.
Yeah. Yep. And yes, it is our responsibility of the community to consider workforce, senior, and affordable housing, but to what level? So at what point should we, or what kind of houses should we be considering adding and how many?
And who does it?
And who does it, yes. Thank you. And how do we incentivize developers, builders to accommodate this? And what is affordable, and who do we want to target? And when does the village get involved, and to what extent?
I love that you answered the question with more questions.
And what was that last one?
Government
I heard, take it down fast.
When does the village get involved and to what extent?
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And
Our first question, what implications do regional growth projections have for the Waunakee community? We answered with, there's going to be an increase in demand for multifamily units. An aging population has changing needs for housing, many of which come from economic pressure and changing of just lifestyle needs. Transportation alternatives will need to be addressed and could be needed. How will they be supported was our follow-up question. And housing trumps transportation for jobs and employers.
Can you explain that?
Economic pressure goes with the aging population. Okay.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Maybe.
That was mine, and that's, transportation isn't going to meet all needs. Housing and being close to work is going to reduce the need for transportation. So having housing is going to be, I think, a better alternative, or it's going to be more usable than having transportation. We've got a 24/7 operation going. Is buses going to really serve that population if they live close enough to be able to walk or ride their bike, or a short drive that they can afford? I think housing is going to provide a better option for people than transportation.
Thanks for the clarification. So very similar to what we heard over there.
So Jeffrey, did I get that down right, that housing will need to accommodate workforce needs? I kind of summarized on the slide.
That's another way to, well, but I do think the point around housing is a better alternative than transportation. Then,
Our next two questions we answered with the same 2 points. How should the community respond? And what are options for addressing housing needs as well as assuring the workforce for Waunakee's growing business community? Kind of what we just talked about. And increase in affordable housing, whether in styles or locations. And then possibly examining this, what we thought was 75% single family and 25% multifamily. We're not sure if those numbers.
The cap, the 25%. So revisiting that and examining that. Okay. All right. 2 minutes for a quick conversation before we break up. Any responses to the last 3 tables? And that's 30, these 3 tables.
So I'm not a community minute member, but I am a member of the community, and you did promise that I would be able to say a couple of things. So in terms of mitigation, I think housing is huge, but I also think that asking our village to look at ways to mitigate when we're planning for east-west routes and other ways to take the burden off of the really busy streets would be something that I would ask you guys to consider. And when it comes to multifamily housing, I would also ask you to consider ways to include not just the single family versus multifamily huge homes, but ways to consider and think about incentivizing the smaller, the 5, 6, 7, 8, 16 plex rather than simply 100 units or above. So as a community member, I'm enthusiastic, but I would like to see it done better. Thank you.
So options with
yes.
How housing is developed. Other comments from
something that I know firsthand, and I also know it by talking to other people and the research I've done, is that the biggest investment many middle income families have is their home. And so when people pay more for rental housing than they do, something they're purchasing, it makes me wonder if everybody is going to be renting where they're going to be when they're 60 years old and they haven't had that investment.
Okay, so consideration for the rental population of long-term. Okay.
Would it be possible for us to get information about, speaking to that 75-25% mix, about surrounding communities and their approach to that number as well? Like, so we have something to compare to like-sized villages?
Yes. I'm going to make a note on this PowerPoint to myself to gather information about, would be ordinances, Adam, that I'd be looking at? I'm guessing
Maybe just the reality of what they do. You probably won't find it in these ordinances.
Well, they're comprehensive plans.
Or comp plans.
Okay, comp plans. And to the degree to which they're following their comp plans, if they.
I think we also might want to make a note about the rental population, what happens, economic stability of renters, long-term renters. Because that's something that we haven't looked into or talked about. All right, we're at 7:30. Thank you for all having this vibrant discussion. We're just getting the ideas out and the issues out. And next time we will have Dan, right? Dan Brown?
We will have, yes, that's the plan.
And we'll learn more about demographics.
Yes.
I think we missed something back here. I think this was a real important point. You know, if we were looking out in these other, in some of the information that was given on us, you know, the 2040.
Yeah.
And, you know, we got to accommodate 600,000 people in this county. And we also heard information about people that, as their millennials are buying, you know, they're renting longer, or they're not buying at all. And I think the point was mainly how to accommodate those people that are not ever buying a home, that aren't sitting on like a $300,000 to $1 million investment. Where are they going to go, or are they just renting without having that big investment? And I think that's...
Yeah, so the consideration for the long-term economic stability
for
long-term renters. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Just get some information about that so we can parse it a little bit.
Good, I think that's important.
Yeah, and also what does it mean for young people who are renting and not making an investment?
Yes, I'm done.
So we need a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll need the motion. Second by Susan. Everybody in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Let's have it. Since we're done, I'm just going to make one quick comment. They're going around. The community, we celebrate the holidays with a kickoff on November